Hello there everybody. We have lots of exciting stuff planned today, and that's because we're going to be using Svg along with a little bit of D3 and React to construct some custom visualizations. So before getting into it, don't forget to show the YouTube algorithm your respect by smashing that like button, and without further ado, let's get started. So today we're going to be constructing this simple planet visual on the right, which despite being extremely straightforward, is something that if you were to do through a charting library like charts.js or Plotly, would probably be a complete nightmare. For that reason, it owes itself very well to this vanilla Svg approach. Moving over to VS Code, you can see here that we have a blank React app. We're going to start by adding the data that we need in order to generate that visual. You can find this through my code sandbox in the description, or alternatively just bring your own data. Once that data's in, we need a place to put it, so we're going to create a new Svg element. We want to give this Svg a height, a width, and some other values that allow us to better place that visual. We're going to set those values up here rather than hard coding them within the JSX to make our life a little bit easier later on. For the time being, let's set height to, let's say, 500, and then we're going to set width to 800. We can pass these values to the Svg by setting the height and width attributes. Let's give this Svg a background color so we can see it a little bit better. Next, we're going to add the only package that we need for this visual, which is called D3.scale. Because I'm using TypeScript, I'm also going to add types, then D3.scale. If you're using npm instead, it's just npm install. We're then going to import the only function that we need from this package, which is called scaleLinear. You can think of scaleLinear as a multiplier that allows your SVGs to better interact with data. What I mean by this is we want the size of each of these circles to be related to the size in our dataset. However, we couldn't simply set the radius of these circles to these values, they would simply be too large. Because of that, we need to multiply or divide them by a number so they fit evenly within our frame and in relation to the rest of the data. scaleLinear takes rid of all that work for us. The first skill that we're going to use is to evenly place our planets within the SVG. We're going to call this xScale. And this is going to equal scaleLinear, along with two functions, domain and range. Domain is the range of possible values that this could equal. In this case, it's going to be from 0 to the number of planets, so points.length. The range is then the distance that we want these points to cover, so from 0 to width. What this means is that these points will evenly be placed within the width that we give it, allowing these 6 values to sit equidistant from each other. We're going to map over our data and utilize some values and ensure that it's working. Here we're going to use a text element with some arbitrary value, and then place it horizontally by using a transform with our scale. Within this translate, the first is our x value and the second is our y value. For x value, we're going to utilize this xScale, and then give it our index, so it understands where it is in the data and can place it accordingly within the SVG. For our y, we want this to sit about in the middle, so we're going to give this our height divided by 2. Once we press save, we can see our values evenly placed within the SVG. To keep these from aligning directly with the edge, we're going to add a little bit of padding. If we do const, padding, and then give that an object, and in this case we're going to add a left padding, so let's say left of 50. Then instead of starting this range at 0, we can start it at padding left, and because this range covers the distance that we need to place our values, it'll shift everything over about 50. We're now going to change this text over to circles. We're going to switch the text down to a G, which is kind of the SVG equivalent of a div, and then inside of that we're going to place our circles. For the time being, we're just going to add a circle, giving that a radius of 5. We now want the size of those circles to respond to the size within our data. We're going to do this by creating yet another scale called sizeScale. That's also going to be a scaleLinear with domain and range. Now the range of possible values here is going to be the minimum size in our data up to the maximum size. Now I'd recommend using a math function to find that automatically, but for the sake of saving time, we're just going to hard code it. Then the range is the possible radiuses that we want this to fit into. Let's say our minimum radius is 5 and then our maximum radius is 50. We can always change this later on. We can then use that sizeScale to set the radiuses of our circle. Within radius, we're going to give it sizeScale, and then we want to get the size from each of the points in the data. In this case, it's o.size. I think it would be interesting to have some overlap with each of these circles, so we're going to make it a tad narrower, and then we're also going to make the maximum radius a little bit larger, up to 60. Next, we want to add some labels above each of the planets. Here we're going to create a text element, Give it the planet name by doing o.planet, and then place it just above the circles. We can utilize the same transform, just like above, give it a translate, keep the same x value, and then offset the y value by about 100. This places the title above our circles, but doesn't quite center it. To center it, we can set a value called dominant baseline equals middle, and then set text anchor also to middle. Now we can see the text centered above our circles. Next, we want to adjust the opacity of each of the planets to be a little bit darker on the larger planets. Here we're going to create our final scale. We're going to call this opacity scale. Keep the same range of possible values from the min to max size, but instead change the range to the ranges of opacity. Here we're going to make the opacity a minimum of about 50% up to 99%. We can then set opacity directly within the circle element by giving it opacity scale and then o.size. Once this is in place, we're going to begin by styling a lot of our elements. Popping over to our app.css, we're going to give some color to the circles. We can set fill, and then we're going to give it a color of AA1111. This is kind of a dark red color. Once we save, we can see that appear. Let's try to make the opacity a little bit lower on these so they start to show through each other. Let's lower our range to about 0.3, and then our maximum up to about 0.6. I like 0.8 a little bit better. Now let's give these a drop shadow. If we go back to CSS, under circle, we're going to add filter, drop shadow, and then let's try 0, 4 pixels, 8 pixels, RGBA 000.15. Now those stand out from the background a bit better. Also, we're going to style our text. If we do text, and then font family, I think Courier New gives this kind of a space vibe. Let's also set a font weight to bold, and then lastly, give it a fill of gray. The final thing that we're going to add here is our moon shadow, which we can do by going back to our app.tsx file. Here we're going to include a circle that will only show up if the value equals moon. If we add some curly braces and then do an o.planet equals moon, and if it does, we're going to render a new circle. However, instead of a fill of red, we need to give this a fill of white, and then also get rid of the opacity. Here let's give it a class name of moon shadow, and then go over to our app.css to design that moon shadow. Let's give it a fill of white, and then make that important so it overrides the default circle styling. We're then going to offset the x and y a little bit so it creates a crescent moon. If we take the same transform translate, pop it over here, set the x to let's try 10, and then set the y to -10. Let's create a sharper crescent by switching that to 7, and there we go. And we're going to get rid of the drop shadow over here so it doesn't stand out from the background. Let's set filter to none, and then make it important so it overrides the default styling. There we go. So this concludes our React SVG visualization tutorial. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, it really helps out the channel, and we'll see you next time.